Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's turn to the ruling on Friday from New York Judge Arthur Engoron in the civil fraud case against Donald Trump. And Engoron has ordered several things. One of them is a ban on Donald Trump from being an officer or director of a New York corporation for a period of 3 years. And another is disgorgement and so forth that totals something like $355 million. And if you add interest on top of that, there are news reports, Bill, suggesting that the total could come out to something more like $450 or closer to $500 million, $500 million. Trump says he is going to appeal. And so one question that I'm very curious to see is whether an astounding figure like that is going to hold up when it gets to the appeals courts.
Yeah, I think he has a good case for appeal. Look, he seems to have exaggerated on some forms in his valuations and I think the square footage of his apartment. But these are kind of common things in real estate. And it seems to me you'd get a more nominal fine. It's hard to believe that this is not an effort to use civil law to ruin Donald Trump financially. The Attorney General, Letitia James, campaigned on actually going after Trump. In other words, let's target him first, then we'll find the crime and charge him with it. And I don't think the judge came off very well in this either. And so I wonder what an appeal will look like.
Kim, I find some of the conduct that is described in this judge's ruling hard to defend as a matter of way of doing business. So some of the misrepresentations in these statements of financial condition that Trump and the Trump organization gave to lenders, including Deutsche Bank, some of the misrepresentations allegedly include valuing rent-stabilized apartments as if they were not under any kind of restriction like that, valuing the Mar-a-Lago Club in Florida as if it could be used as a private residence. And even though the deed on the property says that it cannot be used as a private residence. And then there's this point about the square footage of the famous Trump residence in Trump Tower. Apparently, the reality is something like 10,000 square feet, and yet it was valued in these documents as if it was 30,000 square feet. And the judge goes through and says at one point, to make that valuation, there was a Trump Realty employee who asked if he could see the apartment or if he could get a floor plan of the apartment, and he was told no. They valued it as if it was 30,000 square feet. And then Forbes apparently put in a media request saying, is this correct? This figure looks like it is exaggerated. And Kim, yet they continued to use that same sort of figure. It was signed off again shortly after Forbes made that inquiry, and the judge cites some emails that it was being considered within the Trump organization. And so I find some of the business conduct hard to defend. On the other hand, $355 million, it seems like there would be other ways for New York to police that, including some of the other remedies that the judge orders, including having, an impartial person who is in the Trump organization advising it and overseeing those kinds of valuations. And the Trump team would have to get that sign off before they send those out to lenders again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to try to defend the goings on in New York real estate or New Jersey real estate or any real estate, because it's known as an industry where these kind of shenanigans are part and parcel of the business. But I guess that to me brings up the question of why this is being handled as a civil suit by New York State, rather than this being an issue to be sorted out between the Trump organization and those who did the lending. And that's the point here. The reason it never was is because in the end, the lenders made money on this loan. Whatever the numbers were that were sent in the end, that representation was not material to the question of whether or not Donald Trump was able to repay these loans and whether or not the people who loaned him the money actually made a good deal out of it. And I found it really striking, some of the documents that were in there that the judge cited. He noted that, for instance, the accountant at Mazars, which was one of the organizations that helped prepare these papers, said that the Trump organization in the end withheld some documents that Mazars had requested Well, one answer to that is then don't issue the papers, don't sign off on this if you haven't received everything you were going to get. Also there was a quote from a managing director of Deutsche Bank who worked in their private wealth management thing saying that he assumed the representations that were being given to him were broadly correct. You can ask the question if there was any doubt about that in any way, shape, or form, why Deutsche Bank didn't require more information or require access to that property to understand what the real reality was. In the end, they noted that the loan was largely given because of the personal guarantee that Donald Trump had given. That appears to be, in the end, the only thing that really mattered to them. And Deutsche Bank made money on the loan. Note as well that they told the judge that they had, in fact, assumed that probably some of this was a bit inflated, and they added a haircut to some of these numbers on that assumption. So nobody loses any money. The players all seem to be aware of how this all works. That, to me, is the bigger question. And then the one that you get to, which even if you can make some argument for why this is New York's business, even if you can put aside the fact that it seems incredibly clear that Letitia James, the Attorney General, was simply hunting for a crime to nail Donald Trump with, even if you go there, like you said, there are about 100 different remedies you could have put forward here to actually police this conduct rather than go down the very aggressive road that this judge did.
Hang tight. We'll be right back after one more break. Let's give Donald Trump a word here. Here he is responding to the fraud ruling on Friday outside Mar-a-Lago in Florida.
It's mostly talking about New York, where we have a totally corrupt attorney general. She campaigned on the fact that I will get Trump, I will get Trump. Everybody's seen it. Letitia James. They've all seen it. Well, we'll be appealing, but more important than that, this is Russia, this is China, this is the same game. All comes out of the DOJ, it all comes out of Biden. It's a witch hunt against his political opponent, the likes of which our country has never seen before. You see it in third world countries, banana republics, but you don't see it here.
Bill, as Kim describes, the banks involved here did not lose any money on these transactions, and they are not the ones that are aggrieved coming to court going after President Trump. This is an elected Democratic prosecutor that is doing it. On the other hand, to play devil's advocate here, what the judge says in his ruling is he acknowledges that there are no losses. He says that the New York law at issue here does not require any losses. And he says that New York is the financial capital of the United States, and the state has an interest in making sure that these kinds of financial transactions are made on the basis of representations that are true, or at least a good faith effort to be done. He says, obviously, if you have appraisals, it's an art and a science. But at some point, you get to a value where it's no longer a good faith disagreement. And so he's making the argument that New York has a business in policing this kind of thing. Again, even if there are no specific losses you can point to in this case, other than that the banks would have charged a higher interest rate if they had known Trump's actual financial condition.
Yeah, I don't think any other state has quite the law that New York does. And I would assume that if the judge's ruling stands and they don't change the law, it'll be very bad for business in New York. I think a lot of people won't invest and will get out because they look at this and they say, if this is the kind of justice that we have, no thank you, I'll go down to Florida or something. And the other thing I think is obvious from it is that if it was anyone but Donald Trump, the case never would have been brought. It's not been brought before. It's only Donald Trump. That is not a good standard for a city that maintains itself as a global capital. And so I think New York has a problem too, in addition to Trump. And Trump, look, we criticize him all the time for his dunderheaded things that he blurts out and some really horrible things. But in this case, I think he's more wronged than wrong himself.
Kim, we'll give you the last word, but the point about the breadth of this law, I think, is an interesting one and maybe something that other businesses are now newly aware of. And it does make me wonder whether there are other CEOs who, even if they are more careful with their financial statements than the Trump team seems to have been here or is alleged to have been here, I wonder if there are any CEOs who are wondering, if the state of New York and an elected prosecutor is going to go after a business like this and hit them with a fine and disgorgement and penalties that could total something like $500 million, then that's a real problem, even if I have no reason to think that I might be the next target of it.
Well, not only have they been thinking this, not only are they thinking this, they've been thinking this a long time, because this racket has been going on in New York for a long time, and you already see people taking actions as a result of it. Look, as somebody who was, for my sins, back covering all of the different suits that were brought by Eliot Spitzer when he was the Attorney General, New York has a couple of these sweeping laws like the Martin Act, which already put companies at grave risk should a political figure decide that they want to raise their star by going after some big name in the financial industry. This is just the latest example of that happening, using yet another law. In a way, what this judge did is groundbreaking and not in a positive way. So now these CEOs have even more to worry about. And, I don't think it is any surprise. You look at Goldman Sachs broke ground last year on its new campus in Texas, which is going to be Goldman Sachs 2. It isn't entirely evacuating New York, but it's made clear that to the extent it intends to grow its business, it's going to do so in states other than the, quote, financial capital of the world. You've seen other businesses moving for places like Florida, et cetera. And you know that some of that is due to taxes because their employees want a better place to live, easier to raise family, and more freedom. But you have to believe that at least somewhere in the back of these guys' heads and figuring into that calculation very much is the legal environment in New York. And what you see increasingly, a lot of politicians there who care very little about the law and are happy to abuse it and use it in whatever way possible if it will help guarantee their reelection.
Thank you, Kim and Bill. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.